Hello and welcome to Principia Tutors and Consultants YouTube channel. My name is Marina and today we are going to look at the equation of a circle. Before we get started, I want to make a note that in the digital SAT, you will have access to Desmos for the math sections, so that will affect the way that we solve certain problems. In this video, we're going to look at the algebraic approach to solve some of these problems, as well as do some examples of how we can use Desmos to get to the answer as well. Let's get started. The first thing we should take a look at is the general equation of a circle, which is written here on the right. It is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where h comma k is the center of the circle, so the coordinates of the center, and r is going to be the radius of that circle. Let's take a look at this first question. They want us to graph the circle on this plane. In the digital SAT, the question wouldn't be asked in exactly the same way because you're not going to be asked to sketch anything, but it's still good to know how to use the general equation of a circle to recognize how it's going to look on a graph. Let's first write down the general equation of a circle. From here, it's clear that h is going to be equal to 1 because this is x minus some number and that number is 1. For k, it might be a little bit more difficult to see, but basically we have y plus 2, and this has to look like y minus some number k. And for these two to be equal, this number has to be negative 2. So that when we do y minus negative 2, this becomes y plus 2. So from this, I can tell that k is going to be equal to negative 2. And finally, we have that r squared equals 9. So then we can take the square root on both sides, and that means that r equals 3. Note that I just chose a positive square root because this is the radius, which is the distance, so it doesn't really make sense for it to be negative. In any case, the way that we're going to graph this is first, we know that the center is at 1, negative 2, and the radius is 3, which means that this circle is going to be all the points that are 3 units away from this center, which would look something like this. Let's move on to the second question. We have, which of the following is an equation of a circle in the xy plane with center 0, negative 4 and radius square root of 3? Let's write down the general equation of a circle again, and then we'll go from there. They are telling me that the center of the circle is at 0, negative 4, which means that h is 0 and k is negative 4, and the radius is square root of 3, so r is square root of 3. And now we can just plug these 3 in to our equation to find the answer. X minus 0 is just x, and y minus negative 4 is plus 4, and square root of 3 squared would be 3. And from here we can tell that D is going to be the correct answer. Alternatively, we can use Desmos to graph all of these answer choices and then pick the one that makes the most sense. So let's take a look at that now. We're in Desmos now, and I have graphed the 4 answer choices here. The circle we're looking for has a center at 0, negative 4, which means that these two circles would not be the answer. So we can cross those out. And now we have to choose between C and D. Notice that the only difference between these two circles is the radius. So if we can find the radius of both, we can figure out which one is the correct answer. The question tells us that the circle we're looking for has a radius of square root of 3, but I don't really know what that is as a decimal, so we can use Desmos to find that out. And square root of 3 is around 1.7, so we're looking for a circle with a radius of around 1.7. Notice that in my graph, every big square is 0.5, so the radius of the green circle would be around, like between 1 and 1.5, and the radius of the purple circle would be between 1.5 and 2, which means that I would choose D as my answer because we're looking for 1.7, which would make sense here. It would be 1, 1.5, and somewhere in between that would be around 1.7. So I would be comfortable with choosing D. Let's move on to the next question. We have, which of the following equations represents the equation of a circle shown in the xy plane above? So we have a circle with center 2, -7, and it goes through the point 0, -5. So I think that we should write down the equation, the general equation of a circle again, and then we'll go from there. Okay, we know that the center is at 2, -7, which means that h is 2 and k is -7, so we can plug those in. And y minus -7 would be +7. So from here, we know that it's not going to be b, because this is not what we want, and it's not going to be d because of the same situation, and a and c are our candidates right now. We don't really know which one is the answer. Notice that the only difference between a and c is what the r squared on the right is, which is either 8 or 9. So we need to find what the radius is in order to choose which one is the correct one. We have a few options here. The first one is to find the distance between these 2 points using the distance formula. And the second one is to recognize that the radius, which would be this distance here, is going to be slightly less than 3 units because it doesn't, like, the circle doesn't touch this line here perfectly, or this one, which means that the radius is like slightly less than 3. So r has to be less than 3, which means that r squared has to be less than 9, which is 3 squared. So we know that the right side of the equation has to be less than 9, not including 9. So from that, I can conclude that the answer would be A. As I said, another way of doing this would be to find the distance between these 2 points, and we would need to remember the distance formula. So let me choose 2 and -7 as my x2, y2, and 0, -5 as my x1, y1. So 2 minus 0 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. And -7 minus -5 is -7 plus 5, which is -2, and that squared would also be 4. Which means that the distance is square root of 8, which means that r is square root of 8, which implies that r squared is 8, which makes sense. A would be the answer. Alternatively, we can use Desmos to graph these 4 circles and then choose which one makes sense with the graph that we already have. So let's take a look at that right now. We're in Desmos, and I have written in the 4 answer choices here, A, B, C, and D. And I can tell straight away that B is not going to be the answer because the center is way off. And same with option D. If we look at the graph that we were provided, the center is going to be somewhere here. So this would be correct. And now we have to find which of these 2 would be the right answer. The first way, similar to what we said before, is that we know that this circle doesn't touch this 5 line exactly. It is a little bit less than 5. This point here, it's slightly less than 5. So just with that, I would just choose A as my answer. Another way to recognize this is that we know that the graph, the circle, passes through the point 0, -5. And that only happens for the red curve. So that would be another way to discern which of these 2 would be the answer. Let's move on to the next question. We have, which of the following inequalities would result in a shaded circle when plotted on the xy plane? Let's write the general equation of a circle first. Okay, so from here, it is a little bit more complicated to figure out which one is the right answer. So for this question, I am actually going to recommend that you use Desmos directly because it's going to be a lot easier. We're in Desmos now, and I have written in all the answer choices, A, B, C, and D. So let's take a look at them individually. First, let's graph option A. I clicked on graph, but nothing shows up, which is interesting. I would skip this at this point. Let's look at option B. Okay, this is an ellipse, so we know it's not going to be the answer. And also the shading is on the outside, and the question says that it should be a shaded circle, so we want the shading to be on the inside. So B would not be the answer. C would also not be the answer because it's an ellipse and also the shading is on the outside. And D would be the answer because this looks like a circle and it is shaded on the inside, so I would be comfortable choosing D as the answer. There's something odd going on with option A because it doesn't show up, so let's try to figure out why that is. Notice that this option A has a less than symbol instead of equal symbol, so the general form of this would be very similar, but instead of having an equal sign, it would have a less than sign. Either way, there's an issue here, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it to see if you can see where the problem is. Okay, so the H and the K are not the problem, and there's nothing strange going on here, but the right side of the inequality is an issue, because this is implying that -8 has to be equal to r squared, which would mean that r is equal to the square root of -8. Clearly, this is an issue because this is implying that this curve has a radius that is not real. This is not a real number. And on Desmos, we're graphing on a real plane, so it makes sense that this graph wouldn't show up because it has an imaginary radius. It would not be visible in the real plane. Okay, we got to the end of the video. This is a very short summary. The first thing here is the general equation of a circle, which should be memorized by everybody. It's really important. And also a tip to use Desmos whenever possible. Sometimes it is a lot easier to do something on Desmos, and since we have it available, might as well use it. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out all the other videos that we have on the DSAT in our channel. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one.